Hello, my name is Maxwell Ogaga. Welcome to Dear Timothy Ministries Stories. And I'm very excited to welcome you to this particular episode where we're going to be talking about a panel who started the Gracewell Prayer Ministry that has reached over 1,000 people in the beautiful nation of Kenya. I want you to help me welcome Pastor Lee. Pastor, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And we want to know a bit about your story and how the Gracewell Ministry started. But before then, just tell us, how did you sense the call to ministry?
Okay. So when I was, thank you for this opportunity. Yeah, so when I was about 10 years old, right. A man of God who you've met, Pastor Kanja, he came to our home and he prophesied to me. I remember it. I remember the day, and he spoke to me and said that God was calling me into a ministry that would lead to people being healed. Wow. And I was very young at the time, and I knew that I was going to go into the corporate space, definitely not into ministry. Okay. And so I just pushed that back. Right. And then, but at the time I was ministering a bit in church. I knew I was prophetic and I was into the word, but I was a Christian, like definitely not a preacher. Yeah. And so a few years later, one random day, I woke up and told my parents I want to go to Bible school. And I was 19 years old and I was having a wild phase. And they were so stunned, like, they were like, no, why? And I don't think it's that they didn't want me to go to Bible school, just that statement was not consistent with where I was at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I just feel a conviction to go to Bible school.
And by the way, your pastors are parents.
Yes, my parents are my pastors. Yeah. So you would expect at the time that they will be excited because I'll also be a pastor like them, but they said no. And they thought, it's just a phase. Okay. And they felt like it was really a phase because for the next 3-4 years, I wasn't interested in ministry at all. Yeah. But I knew I had a call. At that time, I could tell I had a call. Just that I didn't think it was a matter of life and death. I felt like I had a choice.
Okay, that was at about 19 now. That's like 9 years after that prophetic word.
Yes.
All right.
And so I had the wild phase for about 2-3 years. Yeah. And one day I had an encounter with God that shifted my life. 1 week in a camp in Uganda, okay. I had an encounter with God that turned my life around. And mine was interesting because I never got into ushering. I just went straight into leadership. And as I was doing all these other things, praise and worship, I was in a core team leading a church. Wow. And I was coming from certain struggles. I had been partying a bit, but there was such an urgency to get me into ministry.
So did they allow you to, so did you finally go to the Bible school?
Yes, eventually I did go to Bible school. Which Bible school? I went to, it's called Global University.
Okay, so for how long that?
I'm still in school.
Okay, so I'm looking at, how do you process the fact that you're called at 10? Mm-hmm. I kind of knew that I would be called into ministry. There's something just inside that I had that sense in that I would be called. Yeah. But at 10, you got the prophetic word, you had the white phase. At 19, what would you say was key to starting the Gracewell? Or how did the Gracewell started? Or tell us what is the Gracewell, and then we look at how it started. So what's the Gracewell?
All right. So the Gracewell is the prayer ministry that I lead. So the Gracewell is an interdenominational prayer ministry. Yeah. And so when I went in to serve with this church, I served for a while. Okay. And then when it was time for me to leave, I left and went home. I was going through a certain season of my life that was very difficult, and so I went to the house and I started to pray for a while, like about a year or so, and I would ask the Lord, so what is going to happen to my ministry? And then one day, because I thought he would console me, and he said two things to me. The first thing, he said, let me show you that I love you. The second thing he said is, I want you to bring women together to pray.
Wow.
And I felt quite inadequate because I was going through this horrible time, and I'm like, am I really there? If I prayed right, I wouldn't be here. So I don't know how to go about this, but I sort of, I went back to my pastor. I spoke to her. I told her, I feel such a strange thing. It's like the Lord is saying I should start a small meetup of women praying. And she was so excited. She said, that's exactly what the Lord wants you to do, and on this day we shall commission you as a pastor. And so that's how I got commissioned by a church that I was no longer serving in. So they called me back, commissioned me, and released me to start.
But that's interesting because we have a lot of stories of people serving ministries, and then they leave, and there's this whole just murky waters around it. But it's interesting to find out that you served the ministry, you went back to your pastor and said, this is what and they called you back and commissioned you. So tell us how that has helped you in the assignment that God has put you in. That whole relationship, serving the ministry.
I feel like relationships are one of the greatest resources in ministry. And the thing about relationships is they require a lot of humility, because you will be right and they will be wrong. You will have a right to be upset. You will be hurt, but it takes humility for you to say, despite all of these things, I need to maintain certain relationships, for the sake of where I'm going. So I feel like maintaining my relationships, it really saved me. It really helped me. And I wasn't burning any bridges. And sometimes you overlook, there are days and also you realize you yourself are human. Like you also need forgiveness. So I decided, okay, let me look at this situation. Overlooking is not just ignoring. It's really like stepping out of the situation, looking at it above, like getting a good perspective, standing at a vantage point and looking at it from all perspectives and saying, okay, at the end of it, what do I want to achieve in this situation? And so I decided, let me go back to them. And I went back to them and they were so honored to commission me in ministry.
That's a whole load of lesson there. So listening to that, I'm thinking we can say that if you had met them and they felt like, well, because at that stage of your life, you were feeling inadequate, which is fine. That's what Jeremiah felt when God called him. Then you meet them and they say, I don't think that's what God is telling you. Then most probably we would not have seen the grace well.
Absolutely.
Then secondly, you talked about humility, which is big. Because you have to humble yourself to go back and say, so we can say the foundation of the Grace World ministry is proper relationship and humility, and that's big in ministry. That's big in ministry.
And also I feel like as my pastors then, I feel like they were very sensitive to the voice of God, because power relationships can be complex. If they had said, we agree with you, give yourself 3 years, I would have believed it. So I would have said, I know God said, but my pastors, God speaks through my pastors. And so I feel like they didn't use that power relationship to subdue me, but instead they ushered me into the next level. They really believed in me. I wanted to start the meeting in the house, and they said, no, you've got to have a launch. You have to have this. You have to have step out, break that box and just begin to think wider than that. And so the next, I remember the next few months, I met a servant of God that said, if you want to have your meetings in my church, please go ahead and do that. And they gave me their hall, they gave me their seats, they gave me their sound, they gave me their people, they gave me money. Literally, they helped me start the ministry. They told me, this is how ministries are ran, this is what you do, this is what a launch looks like. I didn't even preach in my own launch, Pastor Maxwell. I didn't know how to preach. And I just said, okay, I'm going to just step out in faith. I asked a friend of mine to come and preach, and they did so. And that is how on that day we were maybe about 40 women. But I feel like the next thing that happened is very important, because the next meeting we were about 30. The next meeting we were like 10.
Wow.
And one day I was by myself.
So walk us through that process. I like the way the ministry is growing. From 40 to 30 to 20 to 10. And that's instructive, because one of the reasons we do the Dear Timothy stories is for people to not just to hear the impressive part in ministry. So how do you handle, because I've preached at the Gracewell, and it was packed out that day, and you've had meetings where maybe close to 1,000 women. How did you handle that process? Now, your story is very supernatural. I mean, you want to start, resources are there. It's like you have everything, but where are the people? So how did you move through that stage? Were you very convinced when the numbers started dropping? Then the day you were by yourself, I want to hear how that day was like.
I did flyers.
Wow.
The hall was there. The seats were set. Like, the sound was there. I don't know what happened, but nobody came. Wow. Not the keyboardist, not the drummer. Nobody came. So I sat and did not pray. You know how preachers say, I preach to the seats as if it was a 1,000-seater congregation? No, I just sat feeling so defeated. And I was like, what do I do? And I sat there, and later, like at about 6 p.m. when it was already time to be home, a lady walks in, and she held my hand and she prayed. And she prayed for strength.
Now the host is being prayed for. Now, what's the typical program of Gracewell, like from when to when?
We typically start at 9 and finish at 6. But on at that point, that when we first began, it was just 2 to 5.
2 to 5.
Yeah.
So this is like
12.
So you got there like 12, setting up, getting yourself ready, and just thinking people are going to come. Like, wow.
Prepare the word, and it was just so anointed that day.
And that tells us something, that a vision can be from God and have that face. Like, so how did you handle that face? That woman coming? Did that woman specifically come to the meeting?
Yeah, she was coming to the meeting at 6 p.m. And so she walks in and she saw the discouragement.
Wow.
And she came and held my hands and prayed for me.
Wow.
And I remember after that, I had to take about 6-month break. And I could not believe, like, did God not say?
Yeah.
I wasn't interested in starting this thing.
Yeah.
Like, why did I have to take a break? And what's more, Pastor Maxwell, I had to move to my parents' place.
Wow.
So I was living in Nairobi. I had to pack up because I was struggling. Remember I said I was going through a phase. So I was struggling to pay my rent. And so I had to shut everything down and move to my parents' house in the bed I grew up in.
Wow.
And I was like, did I not hear God?
So it's almost like the vision just started this quick and died this quickly.
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you handle that phase? Because there are many people who also are not able to come out of that phase.
Yeah.
So how did you come out? I mean, to the extent where the Gracewell now grew to where hundreds of women are getting blessed.
I feel like sometimes we over-personalize seasons. Like, we make it like I am a failure, I am this, I am that. While simply seasons are just that. Something you're going to, business to be handled, Just look at it like, this is here, I need to handle it, move forward. And I feel like I needed to be in that space where I can tell myself, it's just something I need to handle and I'll be okay. So I didn't crash. I thought I would crash, but I didn't crash. I had a lot going on. I was praying, I was seeking God, I was organizing different things. My parents needed me to help them in their ministry as a youth pastor. So I don't feel like I crashed because I also didn't look at it like this is the end of me. Even if I had made a mistake in starting, I felt like God had factored in everything in my call. So I didn't it's interesting because that's the one time I really didn't crash at all. And so this is about like August, and so I go home, and in January I had this unusual urge to pray. unusual urge for the word. So I would spend almost 10 hours in the word, and I was unwell, so I was incapacitated. I was not moving much. I was just in my parents' house.
Wow.
So I would study and pray and study and pray for about 3 months. That is all I did.
And at this time, physically, I mean, health-wise, you were struggling.
Yeah.
Ministry had stalled finances. You've moved back to your parents' house, and you still found the strength to study and to pray. And so, how did that come up? Like, how did you leave that phase and started again? Then I was just wondering, those who attended the first day, the 40 women, the 30 women, the 20, nobody asked, like, what's happening? Nobody reached out? Or
yeah, they would ask, and I was like, but you didn't come. They would ask, oh, you know, you're such a blessing, when are we having prayers? And I'm like, but you didn't come. Wow. So in month 3, this is March, maybe about beginning of March, the Lord says, I want you to open a WhatsApp group and teach people how to pray. And I don't like WhatsApp groups, so I'm like, no one likes WhatsApp groups. And the Lord said, yeah, do that. So I'm in the house, and I open this group, and I put in about 30 people who can't left. My mother, the people who can. When they would leave the group, I would put them back and tell them, don't leave again. And I said, okay, the Lord said I should teach you how to pray. And so I had been studying a lot. So God would tell me, okay, can we just go into the doctrine of prayer? So many people are praying amiss. Many people don't understand my will. They don't know how to hear my voice. They don't know, how to speak like me. Can we get into that? So we began. And Pastor Maxwell, from 30, on WhatsApp, we are about 20,000 people online.
20,000 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
We have different groups on WhatsApp, on Telegram, on Facebook, where we are about 20,000 people.
And that started right from with people who you put in a group who you know, hey, you can't leave this group, like forcefully. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. So about a month or 2 months in, the lady started to say, can we meet? Wow. And I'm like, well, will you show up? Yeah. And so they said, no, so people just started to ask, can we meet? And so we started meeting. And that is how we have been meeting from 2017 to date. So we started off with a small meeting and small spaces, and I didn't know, honestly, I think this is important for me to say, I really didn't know if I had it. You know how you can be assured about certain areas of your ministry? Yeah. I knew I could pray. I knew I could lead people in prayer, but I didn't know myself as a preacher. I have had to depend on the Lord to teach me how to pray. You know, I could not even lay hands on people. Like I would just gather them, teach them, and I would prepare and fast and pray and stress for 2 whole weeks or 3 weeks, and then I'll ask them to pray, and I will not lay hands on them because I didn't know if I had it. I didn't know if, and the Lord would give me word of knowledge, and I would be too terrified to speak. But I feel like I have really been carried by the grace of God. God has really just stepped in to teach me how to do ministry. It's amazing how from your story you can see the Lord taking you from your sense of insecurity and birthing something significant. Because it's interesting because sometimes when you look at ministry, people always come from this place of strength. Like, I know God has called me. I know God has sent me. It's, this is what I know. God appeared to me. And they're almost like, I'm sure of every step. But I preached to 1,000 people. Yeah. So it's interesting. Now let's look at, tell me some of the testimonies that have come out from the Grace World. Tell me some remarkable testimonies that, this one I can't forget. This one.
So the first one was when we actually began meeting again, and a lady told me that her husband was, cheating on her and had literally moved out of their home, and she was so distraught because she had young children. And so she called me, and she was all the way in Mombasa. And she said, I'm coming to the meeting and I'm expecting.
This is Nairobi now.
So the meeting is in Nairobi. Remember, I'm staying with my parents. So I'm coming from my parents' place, coming down all the way. Then other people are coming from Mombasa, coming up all the way. And so she said, I'm coming to the meeting and I'm believing God for a miracle. And on that day, I spoke to her. I don't even think I prayed. I spoke authoritatively and told her, your husband is coming back home. And he came back home the following day, and that was it.
Wow.
And that was it. That was one. The second miracle was a lady had a shorter leg. She was one of our co-workers. One of her legs was shorter. And so she came to the meeting one day, and by word of knowledge, one of my friends called her out, a minister, and he said, there's someone here with one leg shorter. And he had her sit down on the floor, and he called out the leg. And as I was watching, the leg started to grow. I mean, that was, for me, it was so remarkable. This year, in January, a woman came into the Gracewell with lesions in her brain. So she came in, we had Travail. Travail is our 3-day meeting. So she came in on Thursday with her x-rays. Then we prayed for her. X-rays or scans, and so you could see the lesions. She showed us how to interpret, and so she had a doctor's appointment the next day. So she went and had new scans done and came back without a single lesion.
Wow, amazing.
Those are some of the testimonies. People have given their lives to Christ. People have grown. God gave us very young people to lead teenagers. Some of them are pastors now. People are ministering. There are people planting churches out of coming to the Gracewell. One of my pastors here walked into the Gracewell with a hangover, a terrible addiction, alcohol addiction, and she came in, and on that day the Lord delivered her completely. From that day, she's never had a taste of alcohol. From that day. So those are some of the amazing testimonies.
The glory of God in that vision. What would you say has been the strength in running the vision? When you see the numbers, knowing where you're coming from, what would you say is your strength?
I feel like one of my strengths is stepping out even when I have been afraid. I have not had... I feel like the odds would have been against me because I didn't have experience in ministry and other factors. But I feel like stepping out even when I have literally ignoring, paying no attention or disregarding the odds has helped me, because I've stepped out in boldness when the Lord has said, this is what I want you to do at precisely this moment. I remember one of the meetings, we were just about 40 people, and the Lord said, get a bigger hall. So the capacity of the hall was about 100, and the Lord said, get a bigger hall. And my team said, no, we can't afford this hall as it is. How can we move to a bigger hall? But the Lord, and I'm a very practical person also. I'm not like wild in my, I don't just take leaps in darkness. So I'm very practical, but the Lord said, you must take another hall. And so I told my team, tell the management that we are taking another hall the next month. And they said, of course the team tried, and I told them, no, this is what the Lord has said. So we agreed. And when we agreed, on the day we took the bigger hall, we were about 170. And our leaps in numbers have not been practical. They've not been like 2, 3. They've been in one moment 100 new people walking. Amazing. And that shifts our level. So
you moved like from 50 to like 170 when you took that step of faith.
Yeah, I feel like the second thing is the fact that God was very clear that this was not going to be a support group, more like we are pampering ourselves for being women weak. Exactly. And, the Lord was very clear that we are here to learn how much power is availed through effectual and fervent prayer. And so I kept holding on to that. Sometimes I would be tempted to bring in business forums, to bring in, other wonderful programs, but the Lord said, no, stick to prayer. And so we would teach and pray, and that has really helped us.
So you've also had the temptation of trying to make the vision more comfortable for women. But the last time I preached at the Gracewell, I realized that men were there.
Yes.
So how did that transformation happen? How did it move from a women's prayer meeting to incorporating everybody, including men?
So